Jessica Hirsch Bowery. Michael Warren. Luis Carazana. Here. Ben Chambers. Here. James Freeze. Tiffany Dubinsky. Christine Jacobs. Here. Katie Lacey.
She'll be here in a few minutes. She texted me.
Bill Palmer.
Everybody.
Sarah Pennington.
Present.
Tony Choi. Albert.
Here.
LaPointe.
Just the one. Just me. Everyone?
And Royce Stolzenberg.
Here. We'll start with matters from the public. Do we have any members of the public who would wish to speak? Just let them know. No one there. All right. Acceptance of the agenda, approval of the August 15th minutes. Do I hear a motion? Any corrections? I'll make the motion. Do you have a second? Second. All right, motion and second. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions? All right, minute passed unanimously. Next up, moving towards 2050, public engagement.
Yeah, I just want to let you know we have consultants from EPR here. So Will Cockrell and is joining us in person, and then he is also joined by Alan Simpson online, and they have been working analyzing our public engagement feedback, and they are going to be doing the bulk of the presenting today. Is that shared through Zoom?
Yes, I'm sharing the screen. All right, well, good morning, everyone. Thanks for having us here. We're gonna just do an overview here of the engagement process so far on the long-range transportation plan update. It's been busy here this year on the engagement side for that for the long-range plan. Do have an agenda here of going through what the PDC's engagement goals have been throughout this process. Certainly there are variables and conditions to consider with any type of engagement process that you're doing, so we'll go over that. Have an overview of the, I'll have an overview of the efforts done so far, just to make sure that we have documented that, as well as we have a pending engagement report that's coming out a little bit later this month. So we should have that completed by the end of September and have that available to you all. And then some initial findings, and Alan's going to jump on. He's online, Alan Simpson with EPR, and he's going to go through the initial findings here and the next steps. So, let's see here. Okay, so the engagement goals overall. So a few things. First of all, on the engagement side, the PDC wanted to make sure that the MPO is getting public engagement on setting goals. So the goal statements that are really the foundation for the performance measures on defining needs as well as prioritizing projects. That was a central piece here, identifying needs, the survey, and we'll go over a lot of the public engagement strategies used so far, really aim towards identifying what some of those travel needs or concerns are in the region, as well as prioritizing and selecting projects, talk through that, and then affirming and reviewing the plan document itself when we get further along through the process. In terms of real engagement goals, the MPO is really striving to achieve a more representative engagement, where we're reaching out to everyone, including underserved groups, neighborhoods that aren't necessarily active in the transportation dialogue typically. Want it to also be meaningful, so that when we ask the community to take time to provide feedback and to provide engagement, that there's a very clear communication back to them that their feedback and their time is being used in the process. We don't want to ask many questions if there's not some real intention on using that feedback. So it's very important that it's a meaningful process. And understanding, transportation planning is not the most intuitive thing out there. We were talking recently about how the MPO is updating their LRTP to put projects in the TIP, so the CTB can get in the SYIP. So it's not super intuitive. So we want to make sure that when we communicate out to the public, that we're doing so in a way that it's digestible to the community. All right, just a few variables that we wanted to document on the front end of the process and make sure that we were clear on it. Some of these, you might call them challenges or things that we wanted to address throughout the public engagement process as well. First off, is long-range planning is inherently difficult. For any of you folks who are in local government, you might see this quite a bit when you have your comprehensive plan update. Depending on where you are, you might not get a lot of involvement on that. You might have some empty rooms when you plan those public meetings. But when that first rezoning comes up, then all of a sudden it becomes a lot more tangible to folks, and they'll show up and have a lot of say on that. Same thing on the transportation front as well. I mean, this is long-range planning here. It's a little bit hard to ask folks, what do you envision the next 20 years? When you have a transportation project coming up and there's going to be construction in front of your home or business, suddenly that's much more tangible. It's a lot easier to get that engagement there. So that was one thing we wanted to overcome. Also, there's just been numerous engagement processes in the region between the county's comprehensive plan, the city's comprehensive plan, which is not long ago, the transit vision plan. There's been plenty of other transportation efforts out there with engagement, and that really kind of eats up the real estate in terms of the engagement capital out there. So we wanted to think about ways to get around that. And then again, transportation is just, it's a technical thing. It's sometimes a little counterintuitive. So that was another challenge that we wanted to acknowledge and account for in the process. So in terms of actual engagement efforts, I think PDC, MPO staff has really gone, really above and beyond on trying to reach out to the community, using a number of different strategies out there, from small stakeholder meetings. There's a virtual meeting, open house, community survey, presentations to the CACs in the county, presentations to different community groups, online materials, and so forth. And just want to give an overview of those kind of one by one, just so that we are all kind of on the same page of what MPO has been doing so far. On the stakeholder meetings, we had those in this room right here back in February, and that assembled different groups such as major employers, public safety professionals, as well as other community partners here. Really, the purpose of that was to get their feedback on the goal statements. So what are the overall regional goals, and fine-tuning the objectives, which would then really be essential to developing the performance measures needed to score needs and projects. We also wanted to have these groups be ambassadors to the process, so that when the survey came out later on, they could help us distribute that survey out to folks. Next up, we had the virtual public meeting that was on June 20th, so a little bit later on the calendar, after we really processed the stakeholder meetings. Staff presented this, had some good attendance. Really, the intention here was to inform them on the process and also kind of prep the community for the next few engagement steps here with the open house, which happened right here in this room. So that was on June 21st. Had a series of maps lined up in the room here. The real focus was to provide feedback on those goals and objectives, identifying transportation needs. So there's a big map where you could mark those needs on here, and just trying to identify what are the main community concerns. That's a good step early in an engagement process. with the open house, there was kind of information there of the upcoming survey that was coming out that got launched in July. Again, there's been a lot of surveys out there, so you only have people only take but so many surveys, and a lot of the folks who are really tuned into transportation had gotten hit by a few earlier. But I think we got good good numbers here. It was over 300 responses. There was a map where you could mark on the map specific locations and concerns and issues. They got over 1,100 comments on that, which are going to be really important because you can turn those comments into basically heat maps and overlay projects and transportation needs over top of that, and really get good information on those next steps here. Again, kind of objectives here were to review those goals, objectives, kind of influence the weighting of performance measures, which is coming up next in the process, and identifying those concerns and needs. I will say also on distribution, staff reached out to the stakeholder groups, reached out to the neighborhoods, other community groups, and really tried to work with existing social networks in the region, and just really was pushing that data out. We developed a social media campaign using all the different social media platforms out there to really push that survey out, send information to local media. We kind of had a checklist of everything we could possibly do to really push that survey out, and went through that list a couple times to really try to put a big effort into that. In terms of public intercepts, staff also went out to, there was the National Night Out, kind of a presence in both of those. Staff was at the Transit Center and had a table lined up and wanted to reach out to folks there at the Transit Center. There were also presentations at the Charlottesville Redevelopment and Housing Authority. They have regular meetings with residents there, and staff was there at those meetings to get feedback, concerns, other issues, and help record that as well. I would say also the survey, I think we had good response. Looking at the results, and Alan will go over this too, of just wanted to make sure that it was representative. So we had good response, but we just wanted to get a little bit more diversity here in our responses. So wanted to go take a few extra steps here of reaching out to the community directly. I will say this one right here, Curtis was in one location, Sandy and I were here at the Ix Park, and I think had really great conversations with a lot of folks in the community. With public intercepts, it gives you the opportunity to have a good dialogue with people in the community, which is something you don't get in a survey. So we get some of that you might call deep data from those discussions. Sandy has been meeting with the community advisory committees in Albemarle County. Has been working through those meetings, having a presence there, and going through the plan. Again, another part of this is trying to build that relationship with existing groups to try to get information out, like surveys, other public engagement opportunities, and really get the word out through those existing groups. And I know that there's one more, September 25th.
Yep, with Pantops. I don't know if we'll reach back out to the CACs in this way. Through the other round, it was pretty time extensive, but we will try to coordinate to make sure that they have the opportunity to follow up. And I think, we'll work with Albemarle County staff. Sometimes they do combined CAC meetings. So if there's an opportunity to just put the information in front of them, we will.
Sorry, what was the attendance in August?
No, it was pretty good. I think the lowest one that we had was maybe 7 or 8, but there were several of them that had more than 20 people at them. So, and it wasn't just the CAC members. Creuset, especially, if I recall, had a lot of the public that was there, as well as the Places 29 Hydraulic.
I'd mentioned that there's been a lot of other planning processes going on that can be challenging. You kind of trying to muscle in to get engagement with the community when there's so many surveys, so many other engagement out there. Especially the challenge of working on long-range planning. It's a little bit harder here. So What we're doing with staff is going through these other processes. Since they do exist, they are valid. There has been a lot of dialogue with the community already on these other efforts. So really went through public engagement results from the comp plan, vision plan, other documents we could find, found the public engagement we could there, and pulled it all over into a large spreadsheet where we're documenting those comments and including those comments in the analysis. So that's a good way to, some of these processes are happening now with the comp plan or happened just recently. They're still valid. It's been a lot of the same questions in these efforts, so why not pull them in and have that be part of the dialogue? So that's also been part of the analysis. Staff launched an online project website back last year, so that's been up and running. And then I know Alan, who's joining virtually, put together story maps, which is really intended to be more of a virtual version of the open house, where you can actually go through the maps, interact with them, turn layers off and on, and provide feedback that way as well. And as I mentioned, we did have social media presence and just try to hit, as much of the kind of that social media side whenever there's something coming up, especially with the survey or meetings, and try to use best practices with the different platforms. Officially had to change the Twitter logo out with X. I guess that's what we're calling it now.
Had to.
I don't think had to. I mean, I don't know. I don't know what the rules are now. So just real quick on the engagement report, and Alan's going to get into some preliminary findings here in a second, which is more interesting here. But at the end of this month, we're going to have a full report of all the engagement, and it's going to give a summary of each engagement approach, each channel that we used, and what we found. There were some kind of interesting results where the main priority on the survey might have been a little different than the priorities we saw with the public intercepts at the transit center and so forth. So that's going to be interesting to really lay that out and figure out what do we do when there's some sort of disagreement here from these different areas. So we'll talk about that. We do want the engagement report, which you'll see soon, and we're actually almost done with it, but that can serve as the engagement chapter in the plan, so it's nice to start to create material for the plan document itself, and certainly is going to be filling up the appendix part of the engagement too. And then on the back half of the report, it lays out specifically how exactly are we going to use these comments in the process. And that goes back to having a meaningful process where whatever we're collecting, we want to maintain trust with the community. So if we ask a question, it means we have an intention to actually use the answer here and show how that actually influences the process. In terms of function, this could be, the report could be a standalone document which will live online. We hope that will show the community that we've collected the feedback correctly and we're presenting it back to them and validating that. Again, it can also be elements of the final document as well. So it's always nice to start to create the content of the plan as you go along. And in terms of outcomes, really that public engagement of everything we've collected, the questions, the surveys, the discussions, the scripts on those conversations, everything was really designed to address these 4 areas of getting public feedback on how to weight the performance measures, so the goals, objectives, and how that's going to influence the prioritization of needs, as well as how that prioritizes projects when we get into this next step coming up. It also influenced project selection directly, so we're going to map all comments, put the projects on there, and if there's a project that's kind of on the fence between the vision list and the constraint list, if we get a lot of public support for it, then that kind of moves it around, kind of those thresholds on those points. If we have a lot of comments on a project that could potentially influence the design of that project or an approach. I think also just looking into the future for future long-range plan updates, there's going to be some gap needs where there's a need identified, but there's not specifically a project assigned to that need to address it. So getting from the community, kind of what are their preferred approaches here, and studies being done that it's those studies, that future work on identifying projects, developing projects, are aligned with the community's vision here of what is their preferred way of addressing travel needs. So that was, I'm going to hand it over to Alan. Hopefully Alan can hear us okay. I'm going to advance the slides for you.
Cool. Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Great. All right. So as Will mentioned, we're working on an engagement report that I'm putting together. So we're going to have that done by the end of the month, but we wanted to kind of go over some initial findings and what we're seeing so far from all these engagement efforts. So first, we had a lot of open-ended comments from the in-person efforts for the Moving Toward 2050 plan, as well as past engagement efforts, all put into a spreadsheet that I went through and coded. So we use the following categories. These just kind of came up naturally as I was going through the comments. So safety, efficiency, connections, multimodal improvements or needs, land use concerns, economy, and everything else. So the report's going to tie these categories into the plan's goals. So, for example, a lot of the comments that were categorized as other were about the environment. So we'll probably make a new category there for those. Connections, a lot of times that was related to equity, accessibility. So we'll make sure that these comments kind of tie into the goals and you know, how it all relates. So we'll have more detailed analysis of these comments in the engagement report. And then I'm going to show some graphs here in the next couple of slides, but note that a lot of these comments fell into more than one category. So the counts you're going to see on these graphs, they're higher than the actual number of comments we got, because a lot of times, you know, safety, multimodal, connections, you know, one comment covered all three of those categories. So Will, if you want to advance to the next slide. So first, this is how the in-person engagement efforts broke down. So everything that's been done in person for the Moving Toward 2050 plan. So multimodal concerns dominated the themes of these comments. So people really were concerned about bike access, pedestrian access, public transit. That all falls into the multimodal category. Safety was second, but you know, quite a bit lower than the multimodal concern. And that's kind of a theme we've seen in these comments. We kind of expected to see a little bit more emphasis on safety, but you know, multimodal comments would range from, you know, we need a bike lane here for better access, to we need a bike lane here because it's dangerous for biking, we need a protected bike lane. So I kind of tried to split those out. If it was explicitly about safety, I mentioned it there. And then you got efficiency, so that's mostly related to traffic congestion, efficiency of bus schedules, that kind of thing. Connections, that's anything from the need for sidewalks to more bus routes. A handful of comments that were explicitly about land use, zoning concerns, that kind of thing. Anything that was related to parking specifically went under land use. And then 55 comments in the other categories. So that kind of suggests we need to kind of break those out into other categories. But environmental concerns really dominated the other category. You want to move to the next slide. So compare that to the Albemarle County comp plan update. Land use was by far the most dominant category here. And a lot of these comments were talking about, you know, a need or a desire to preserve rural space, concerns about growth, that kind of thing. But there were also a lot of comments about public transit. So a lot of the multimodal comments you see here were about, you know, the need for more bus routes coming out to the county, that kind of thing. Efficiency, most of that was about traffic congestion and the concerns about increased congestion if there's future growth in the county. The other categories didn't really show up too much. The Seville Plans Together survey, multimodal concerns dominated that one again. A lot of discussion about bike lanes, sidewalks, bus routes, that kind of thing. By far the most common comment we heard there. Everything else kind of, all the other comments were fairly even down there at the bottom. Yeah, that one was absolutely dominated by bike lanes, bus routes, that kind of thing. And the regional transit vision, again, pretty similar to the Seville Plans Together survey. You know, this was about the whole region though. So again, multimodal concerns were at the top. That kind of suggests that we need to break those comments out again into more specific categories. But again, those are mostly about the environment, that kind of thing. So yeah, we saw a little bit of variation in the different, the different public engagement methods here. The Albemarle one was the one that stuck out the most to me about land use and zoning concerns. But in general, there's a lot of discussion about the need for more transit routes and bike lanes, sidewalks, pedestrian facilities, that kind of thing in all of the surveys. So the MetroQuest survey. So we're going to go over a little overview of what we saw there. We only had a handful of open-ended comments. The previous slides were all just open-ended comments received from those engagement efforts, but this one was a little bit more targeted, or a lot more targeted. So we had 334 survey participants. We had about just a handful of open-ended comments, but we'll address those in the engagement report. So the next slides are going to go over kind of the breakdown of the responses we heard. I'm also going to go over a couple of maps because we got 1,100 comments on the mapping portion of this. So the first question in this survey is about ranking priorities. What was most important to people in terms of transportation needs? This one we did see a high number of comments related to safety. So that was the highest ranking topic. Environmental concerns were second. Multimodal accessibility was third. Land use and efficiency and economic development were both tied for last place. So you see a little difference here between this and the other engagement efforts. So that was a little interesting to me. Move to the next slide. So the next question here, the next three questions were about trade-offs. So, and apologies if you guys have already seen this survey and know this, but I put the questions in here, screenshots from the survey, so you know what we're talking about here. So the first question was about balancing the priority between roadway improvement and multimodal system improvements. So the graph over here to the right, if people wanted to see more roadway improvements, they were voting to the left, so far left, left, neutral, depending on how strongly they felt about that. And if you wanted to see more multiple modes of transportation, you'd be voting more to the right. So the far right was definitely the most common response here. So prioritizing multiple modes of transportation. That's a pretty clear result to me. Access trade-offs. This one was pretty evenly distributed. A lot of people were pretty neutral about this. But there was a lot of neutral, and then the next was kind of a tendency to want access to jobs. But so this question was about, should transportation projects be more about getting people to work or getting them anywhere else? So fairly even distribution, maybe slightly tilted towards jobs, but it's a pretty even breakdown here.
Isn't that really people voting for both?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, it's a pretty even breakdown. And the last question for trade-offs here was about climate concerns. So this was basically asking, are you more concerned about traffic, or are you more concerned about active public transportation, in terms of which do you think would be better for meeting climate goals? And active and public transportation definitely seemed to win out here, but there was still some sentiment for congestion reduction, and these were kind of tied hand. They're related issues, but yeah, that was how that one broke down. The next few we're going to go over, these are just some very high level maps. They might be a little hard to read. The engagement report is going to go into more detail with these. I'm going to kind of zoom into some of these areas where we're seeing a lot of comments. So every marker here you see is where someone left a comment where they wanted to see an improvement in public transit, bus stops and bus routes. So we're seeing up 29 up to the airport. A lot of comments there, all throughout Charlottesville. Obviously, we're seeing a lot there. Crozet, we have a lot of comments, and then we have a few more spread throughout the region. So yeah, in the engagement report, it will go into a little bit more micro detail on these areas and highlight hotspots. Probably add some heat maps as well. Bike and ped. Here we're seeing, distributed all over the region. A lot in Crozet on Park, looking for bike and ped improvements. West Main Street in Charlottesville is a hot spot there. And then, throughout Charlottesville and throughout the region, plenty of other locations where people were looking for bike and ped improvements. Up 29, you see that as well, a little hot spot there. So again, we'll go into a little more detail in the engagement report, but that's the overview of those improvements. Roadway improvements. This is a lot of these were about intersections. I think that was the dominant theme when people categorized a comment as a roadway improvement. A lot of concern about intersection improvements and anything that kind of didn't directly fall under like a bike ped improvement or a transit improvement. Concerns about the quality of the road, number of lanes, that kind of thing. But intersections and intersection safety is probably the dominant theme here. Next slide. And finally, these were all comments related to safety. So again, this map, I don't know how much you can get from this map. I think it's going to be more useful in the report when we kind of zoom in on the hot spots here. But Preston Avenue in Charlottesville, 5th Street, West Main Street, a lot of roads in Crozet had a lot of markers in there. So plenty to look at in the engagement report with this one. For the survey, we also had kind of some demographic questions. The majority of people who took the survey drive alone as their primary form of transportation. And then biking came second, walking, carpool around 7%. 4% of people took the bus or other forms of transit, and then everything else kind of 0 to 1%. So mostly car drivers, but a good chunk of bikers and people who use other forms of transit. Race, the breakdown for race, 77% was white or Caucasian, 14% preferred not to answer or other, and then all other races are about 1 to 2%. So the breakdown there was mostly white and not a ton of representation from other races in the survey. For age, pretty even breakdown. 35 to 44 was the dominant category, followed by 65 and older, and then pretty even breakdown for the rest. No one under 18 for the survey. And household income, again, pretty even split. And this goes clockwise in terms of the legends. It might be a little hard to make out those colors, but yeah, pretty even split in terms of income. Not a ton of low income respondents. The majority of respondents were above the $50,000 household income mark. That's how the online survey broke down. And then gender identity, skewed male, 43% female, 8% prefer not to answer, and then 0 to 1% transgender or non-conforming or non-binary. So that was the breakdown of the initial results of what we saw from all these engagement efforts. I think so. The next step is, for the next week or so, I'm going to be going through everything and finishing up the report and going into more detail and kind of gleaning some insights from all these results.
And just to add again to what Alan and Sean with the representation, as part of when we looked at that, then we decided, let's take some additional steps to get some more of that diversity in there.
Exactly.
I think pretty good spread on the income side. Race side, we did want to reach out, so went to the transit center, had the public intercepts, went to other meetings to try to get that. In terms of next step, last slide here of I'm going to have the full engagement plan wrapped up by the end of this month. Also looking at to finalize a weighting for the performance measures, and that's, I know, coming up, I think, on your agenda here in October. Starting to share the candidate project list. I know that we're pulling together all the candidate project, a list with a little bit more information than what would be normally shared through just a spreadsheet. So we have a little bit more to look at there, as well as a map of all those in the region of just what of all the projects that have been studied and documented in the region that we're evaluating. working to, identify high priority needs. And so really pulling from the gap process that was done earlier and trying to identify and prioritize the travel needs in the region, and then beginning to pare down that candidate project list, because there's a ton of transportation projects in the region. Can't score all of them there, so really trying to pare it down to what are the most effective projects to address the needs that have been identified. And did have a few questions, but just to kind of get discussion going. Certainly want to see kind of what your takeaways were, if you saw anything interesting or counter to what you were thinking there. We did have a question too of, we can look at these things like the survey, the public intercepts, of these different channels and look at them independently, or we can put them basically, average them all together into one consideration. So if we put them all together, then kind of how staff really weighs the performance measures and goals to kind of be an aggregate of all feedback. If we keep them a little separate, granted, some of the engagement we did was to try to get more representation, more diversity here, whether we kind of keep those separate and try to consider those as we're looking through the process. So just kind of philosophical approaches there, but did want to first see if there's any major takeaways that you all saw.
I'll start. So you mentioned diversity and so what was done to try to achieve more diversity? Because when I look at it, I mean, certainly from a race standpoint, there wasn't much. And can you go back to the income chart?
Do you want me to respond to that, Will, or do you want to? One of the things that we did was try to work with organizations that specifically have relationships with some of those communities. So that was one of the reasons we went to the transit centers, and also we worked with the with CRHA. They have their regular planning meetings with different communities throughout the city of Charlottesville. So we did conduct some outreach with them, and then we also had some of those representatives, like PHA, for example, the Piedmont Housing group. We had those on our stakeholder committee. So we had those engaged. We had some of those organizations that work with some of these more vulnerable communities at the table right from the very beginning to build into the process. So the challenge is that we're not going to be able to necessarily reflect the demographics of the people we talk to in person, but we did make a really specific effort to make sure that our outreach was targeting kind of areas or organizations where those perspectives would be represented.
Yeah, I appreciate those efforts to try to get more involvement, but it's really not represented at all here. So both in the race and then I'm sorry, I can't really, my eyes are, I can't really make out all those colors, but it would be great if you had a line on the median household income. And I would venture to guess from just the numbers and the colors that I can see, is that you're well above the median on more than 60% or 70% of the respondents. So, and that's not even getting to low income, but just, so if you just have the median, so that's.
I think what they're trying to point out is these aren't the only people that they serve.
This is just.
They're only documents that they want.
Correct, but then.
So it doesn't incorporate.
How do we incorporate it so you actually get a more comprehensive, so we understand, okay, this is the response, so your Gantt charts are representative of the population that you actually met.
Yeah. So
this is what you're showing us, but
yeah. So this is from the survey portion, which is what triggered those additional actions. And the survey was probably half of all people engaged, but certainly sitting at the transit center, National Night Out, the CRHA meetings, the stakeholder groups, it's really difficult to collect this data if you're talking to 100 or more folks at events to also collect their income. They're just not going to really provide that in that format. So part of this year was just to show what the survey kind of composition was, and then how that triggered us to do these other next steps. Unfortunately, we just don't have much of a way to document race or income, and we certainly weren't going to try to eyeball that. I mean, that's not something we can do. So, so yeah, it's unfortunate we can't get all that data, but this was probably about half. I think it was over 600 people engaged. We had about a little over 300 on the survey. So kind of that other half of the engagement was explicitly focused on trying to address those income race numbers that you're talking about.
But one of the things we could do, we can't put everything on a graph like this, but one of the things we could do is maybe try to sort of, especially the areas that we're focusing on filling some of these demographic gaps, to talk about who maybe like the average, person that is served by those organizations or services. Maybe just to sort of try to highlight that a little bit better.
Yeah, I think that would be helpful. The picture of this case is
Yeah.
a large area, which are probably the most vulnerable, the ones that you're from a transit standpoint, multimodal, the ones who really want to try to find the most upward or not the representatives. And I get that you might be reaching out and that you are reaching out, but it's just not shown. So you might want to think about how you capture that data. But there are ways to do it. And there's, as they're coming in, there are ways of, if they're not to give their name, let's say, there's a range of income groups. For instance, maybe you only have half of the people that will let information out at least.
How was the input received for the in-person steps?
It was really a variety of ways. So we had, a lot of it was just inviting people to, we had a poster that showed our goals. We had some maps that were available, and we had to try to capture the waiting, like where we were having tables and we're set up in one place. We had like an opportunity for people, we would give them pretend transportation money and ask them how they would divvy it up between the goals and objectives. And then it was just like open feedback, like tell us what you think about the transportation system. So it was very, very open, and it was based on them either filling out a comment card or telling it to us directly. Now for the places where we, like the CAC meetings example, where just meetings that we attended, and this was really us just having a discussion and me saying, this is an overview of the long range transportation plan. What are your top transportation priorities? Like that was basically the prompt. The second prompt that I had at the very end was just this like stream of consciousness, like idea, like what is the first thing that you think of when we say, in order to improve the transportation system, we need to focus on, and just kind of let them know, which sort of helped us understand what their framework was for the feedback that they were providing.
Seeing different priorities in person people that
The in-person they were a little bit more focused on the multimodal side, and the survey was a little more focused on the safety side. And with the in-person discussions, we did try to mimic the survey as much as we could. So we did have maps that were printed out, and we tried to kind of talk about where do you live and kind of where can we, what are the areas around here, and went through those. And then had the money game kind of exercise that we had with them. So we tried to really, we couldn't, the trade-off side was one part of the survey we couldn't hit so well. But I think we had pretty good success with the in-person at the public events. We averaged like maybe 10 people an hour, which was pretty good when you look at the National Night Out at the Transit Center, kind of those discussions.
So when we're looking at kind of the harder data you're presenting here, like the maps, are those in-person interactions reflected in those, and to what extent?
Not yet. This is just the MetroQuest survey, and I believe that was part of what we were going to do, is combine the public intercept feedback that was location specific into the map as well.
Yep.
So we have a database where we have all comments, and we put all comments from all areas and put them all together. So that's kind of part of the analysis. And then also just kind of within this process of all the surveys, and then any in-person discussions. If someone mentioned a location, that turns into a data point and put on that.
Yeah, right now the maps just show the stuff for Metro Quest, but I'm going through the comment log and noting anything that has a specific location, and I'll add a data point for that.
So, yeah, I mean, I think it would be helpful to present those kind of separately, whether it's in colors or something, or different maps, so we can get a sense of what comes from, you know, which terribly skewed data source.
Just have an observation on some of the results, and initial results, so it's like such a strong, affinity or commenting on multiple stuff, like things, and given what we heard last meeting about the proposed changes to the smart scale scoring, how we can score that big as we kind of develop our priority project areas, how we sell to the public. So this is much on that aspect of the challenge. It's a challenge. That's for sure. Yeah. That might be the way to fix those slides.
Localities will still be able to apply for the smaller bike path projects as well. The challenge is that they might not score as competitively as they had previously. Yeah. Yeah.
And if application, the number of applications also decreases. Localities will have determine what priorities will be within the two applications.
Did you get back to the next steps? I guess the one thing that kind of, and it kind of talks a little bit to big like ped projects or whatever have you. How do you see taking the points that we're going to get from different individuals who are filling out a survey, and of course they're looking at it from the perspective of where they live or where they commute or whatever, to the project that they see, and you know they would like to push up. How does that work into more of an integrated system? I think that's one thing that the community could benefit from, is having a more systemic bike plan that would then allow us to like take bits and pieces off of building out the system.
Yeah.
So how does that work in your process?
Well, I mean, we have all the kind of the attribute data, so the specific wording that people use when they place the dot, not only in the survey, but also verbally. So we've got points on maps, but it's actually more than that too, because we can look into it and see what specifically are they saying about that point. We're coding, and we can kind of break that data out into different areas. In terms of kind of more system regional bike pedestrian plan, I mean, that's kind of the same information you collect with a bike ped plan too. So that can kind of feed into whatever efforts in the future might go towards that. I think for the purposes of the long range transportation plan, one is we typically will take those points on the map and we'll overlay it with kind of the needs that have been identified on the map. So we can verify and look at what the data tells us, the secondary data, is the public engagement, does that align well with the secondary data of what that tells us the needs are? And if they perfectly overlap, that's great. And that validates what the data is telling us. If there's some areas that are kind of popping up that the data isn't showing us, then that kind of triggers a few other actions of, is there something else going on here that the data just isn't capturing here? Because data is great, but it doesn't always capture everything. So maybe there's some other issue here that requires some primary data collection, maybe kind of looking at the site and seeing if there's something else here that's being missed from kind of the VTrans set of data. I think the other part of it too is, if there is a kind of a hot spot with the public comments that hasn't been identified yet, there's not a project, there's not identified need yet in place, then the MPO can use that to help develop its UPWP and say, these are some locations that are really high concern locations. Maybe there's data here supporting that. Kind of to set up of, we need to study these areas. There might be some strong preferences put in place where here's a corridor, it's a big concern. We want multimodal approaches here on this corridor. So that might be kind of the trigger of, we should study this here and look at how multimodal approaches here on this segment here. Really the way this long-range transportation plan has always been set up is it's typically taking projects that have already been identified and studied through VDOT and other processes, and it's scoring those projects and going through. And if there's any issues or hotspots where there's not a project already identified, then that kind of comes up for the next 5-year update of, here's an issue, we need to develop something for this area. Because developing a project, that obviously that's a whole other process that is kind of aside from the long-range transportation plan, at least kind of the tradition of how this region and most MPOs in Virginia approach that. So I think it's going to be helpful in that regard. I think we're going to hand everything over to the MPOs. They should have a whole database of all comments in all locations, all points, and you can track it and analyze it any number of ways.
Did you find any of those places as you look at data now that's going to stand out to you that disconnects or anything like that?
Yeah, that's what Alan's working on right now. So
that's being processed.
That is
so
the process.
those kind of things.
Yeah, and part of the limitations of the slides we're showing now is just kind of what we have so far, but these are just little bits and pieces of what's been gathered so far. But kind of the full report has all the breakdowns and more of the actual analysis. This is just kind of a scatter shot here of just what we can produce for today.
I just would follow that up. We may end up finding and work to prioritize and stuff. You might have a community that equity issues or something like that.
Oh, yeah.
Have you. But I mean, putting a shared use path in that neighborhood that doesn't attach to anything else in the system just allows them to ride their bike up and down from their houses.
Oh, yeah.
So,
Yeah.
I think the system somehow needs to be considered in this.
Well, yeah, I think I just want to reiterate Will's point before. Like the projects that are developed are being developed through small area plans and corridor studies and things like that. So the projects themselves should have been developed with some sort of larger context in mind. And the other thing I want to emphasize is that we are also not developing these recommendations without being in close consultation with the localities, because I don't want to necessarily say as a region, these are our priorities, if those are completely kind of, different than maybe where the localities are planning to go through their comprehensive network process. So again, we've been talking like this gives us information to start making decisions, but this isn't the only information, and there's still going to be a lot of a qualitative evaluation as we really determine what makes sense as far as a priority.
I think that's the key word, qualitative.
Yeah.
And the last thing, a lot of my friends here, sometimes they're beholden to the localities when they work with them. I think most people who live in the city don't know where the city-county line is.
Mm-hmm.
They want to be able to bike process, so we need to sort of work in concert to make sure we're that reasonable.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
Because in terms of, so the survey was definitely skewed more on, we had a range, but certainly higher income, a little less diversity on that front. The public intercepts kind of kicked in order to try to get more kind of equity, kind of hit different income ranges. So those are going to be kind of more on that end. We talked about just combining those data sets into one, and we're just analyzing basically the sum of those data sets. Another approach is to keep them separate and say, this is what we heard in this set, and this is what we heard in this set. And let's kind of treat these to balance them together here, so that they're pretty split. I mean, the survey was probably almost half of what people engaged here, so they're both kind of larger data sets. But any thoughts on that, of kind of, if you put them together, then one can kind of change the averages here, whereas if you keep them separate, you can kind of consider the needs and the feedback from these different groups. You don't have to have a direct answer, just kind of.
So based on what you said earlier about sort of the different outcomes of the feedback that you got from each, you said that the intercepts had more multimodal emphasis, but looking at your trade-offs, it looked like everybody was pretty much on board with multimodal stuff. So
yeah, for sure.
Pulling them together, I don't really think is going to change that. So I don't really have a problem with just working with one visual set.
Okay.
Is there any further definition of multimodal and what people were particularly interested in? Because this is broad.
Yeah.
Are you talking about just we need more sidewalks because we don't have sidewalks?
Yeah. Yeah, it tended to be, multimodal tended to be mostly about transit or biking. I put sidewalks and things like that tended to go more in the connections area. Multimodal was mostly focused on like transit, bike facilities, that kind of thing.
So do we know if they were focused more on we need transit so we can get places or bike lanes? Yeah,
it depends on where the comments were, and that's something that I should probably look at in a little more detail and kind of break out in the final report, and I will do that. But multimodal was kind of a catch-all for anything related to that.
I do want to, there's some other variables here that can introduce bias, and one of them is we just went through a transit vision planning process, and we did have a lot of involvement in that. This survey could be a little undercounted, because if you just took a survey and then the MPO sent out another survey, then maybe they didn't take it. There might be some self-selection bias here too. We try to do as much as we could to try to eliminate as much bias as possible. That's impossible to eliminate it completely, but I did want to acknowledge there could be kind of a little undercount on the transit side, because there has been so much transit kind of surveying done recently. So we are looking at the transit vision plan, trying to pull that in here as well and have that be part of the data set, but just something to be aware of.
And we were doing our transit survey currently, so sorry.
Yeah, it's okay. We should just have a
transit pilot, I mean, there's no.
Yeah. You just have a one regional survey. But yeah, so I'm gonna guess that the survey is gonna, that there are some self-selection biases here, I guess. Which is something we just want to document. Any other possible biases, we just want to document it, have it in the report, just so that transparency.
Yeah, it's also kind of interesting because when we did the public intercepts, people felt like they needed to explain their choices to us versus the survey. You know, people might have felt a little bit more freedom to just, you know, whatever their initial impression was. So.
In terms of the online survey, did you run into any issues with spam or bots? We've had some issues with that with our initial requests recently.
We didn't, not that I know of. We did do another survey though for a different community, and there were tons of responses from other countries, so we can track the IP addresses. So
I am getting those from our comment form online though.
Yeah.
Yeah, we had such a bad one with our TSP survey. It was like we had 5,000 responses, but only 10% of them were real.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's something we're paying pretty close attention to now.
Yeah, we can track IP addresses on there, and then also we look at the timestamps to try to track. So if it's like 100 came in like between 2 a.m. and 2:05, then that's kind of a little weird.
Yeah. I was gonna say everything on the comment log, nothing looked fishy with the IP addresses or anything.
How long did the survey take on average?
I'm sorry?
How long did the survey take on average?
In terms of how long it's out there, that it's open?
Yeah, how long would it take an individual?
Oh, an individual. This one, Alan, do you have the average response time?
Yeah, it looks like it was around 10 minutes. Anywhere from 5 to 10 minutes.
And probably a lot of that was the mapping. There were 334 respondents, but we got over
Yeah.
a lot of app comments, so that's probably where people were spending their
It's
time.
fairly short.
Yeah.
2 weeks, then what? So, I mean, I'm wondering if for your in-person, if there isn't a way to have another public working, where you have iPads or whatever. And say that's part of their engagement coming down there is they'll take this, maybe you can get another 5-minute survey. Take a 5-minute survey. It's a way of capturing that information for those in person.
Yeah. Oh, we also made postcards for folks. So we handed those out to people in person, and you could write comments and hand the postcard in, but there's also a QR code for the survey. So we did ask people to take the survey. And I think we saw a tiny bump, like right after the intercept is like a little blip, but yeah.
Thank you. Thank you to Will and Alan, and I'm sure we're all looking forward to seeing the more detailed analysis.
Yeah, thank you all.
And Will, Alan and I got your comments here, so we're going to make a few adjustments on the report. If you have any more thoughts of something you'd like to see in terms of the analysis, please let us know, because with any data set, you can show it any number of ways. So we want to make sure that it's consistent with the MPO's expectations.
All right, next up we have VDOT updates, I believe.
The tip.
Oh, tip, Justin. All right, Ryan.
Yeah, included in your packet was a set of adjustments by VDOT to MPO. This is an informational item. Basically, it's moving money from FY23 to FY24. I don't know if you want to individually go through those or.
Anyone have questions about it? Any bridges gonna collapse because we waited to maintain them, or?
Okay.
Seems pretty straightforward. Don't need a vote?
No.
All right. Smart scale.
Do you have a presentation, Michael, or?
I don't have a presentation per se. We're moving forward with the 2 pipeline projects in the community. We actually have a meeting scheduled on Friday. The meeting will scheduled to attend that, I believe, for our report back from what the findings have been so far on the Barracks Road project. We're still working on the Ivy Road. Our consultants sort of came back and gave us an internal presentation. We asked them to do a little more work on the Ivy corridor. So hopefully we will come back with an invite to that meeting first week of October. What we're finding right now, I mean, obviously, they're assessing crash and congestion data along Barracks Road corridor. And that, in some respects, is kind of, self-evident for the data, and I think it will be interesting to talk about is especially medians, closures potentially in certain places along that corridor, probably something in addition to just what types of picture improvements might be considered the corridor. The Barracks Road corridor is a very tough place to try and do something. A lot of infrastructure, a lot of built environment right up on the road there, and getting underneath the bypass is a tough nut to crack. There's not a lot of room for facilities. There, of course, there's existing sidewalks out there, and I think we found the sidewalks in places, there's conflict with utility poles, not ADA compliant, some of them not in the best conditions, missing ADA ramps. There are some conflicts with pedestrian movements in the interchange itself. There's permissive yellows for left-turn traffic, and so that creates conflicts with pedestrians who are walking along there. So that might be a relatively easy fix. But I think trying to get a shared use path down there is going to be a real big challenge for us. And I know there's going to be significant pushback on that from the folks in the county who are on the bypass. And how we, figure out solutions to that is going to be interesting. Some of the solutions may be beyond the studies that we have. It could be some of those neighborhoods that you solve them by bringing them down by the Best Buy, and tie them back into the multi-level network by power, Green Valley there or 29, there's many ways that you serve that neighborhood that you can't serve them with this constriction that is applies. And I guess I just closed, we did have really good responses for our surveys, significant returns, which we're trying to go through and create the data sets for those. I think our consultant had a panel. Obviously, we should see how you broke them down. Within graphic stuff, I don't know if we've done that, and we need to do that, especially the development conversation here. It would be important to respond to that. Feedback today. Ivy Road is just a challenge. I mean, you change one thing here, you affect something on the other side. And I think what we really need to be able to do is come back to if you start focusing on the intersections themselves and start to lose the forest and trees, and start to think about transit, we can start thinking about multimodal, especially light facilities. Some solutions may jump out, but really the land use that's happening in this area is to the north side of the tracks, and that's the hard. Again, not the track. So I think we kind of leaned on our consultants to sort of think a bit more broadly. That's something forces us to delay. But hopefully, our track moving forward here, again, we've got a very good meeting on Friday this week. We're about to talk about those solutions. And that will start to define sort of what the scope of the second phase is, and we really start to move from this first stage of potential solutions towards defining what would be our preferred solutions in the second phase, and then ultimately preliminary engineering in the third phase. With Ivy Road, I guess I'll remind you the one nuance in this one that you've also created, kind of working closely with Jessica, to do this corridor focus group, which is to represent about 15 people who represent business owners and HOAs that are directly in the study zone. We'll be having a meeting with them on October 23rd. To present what we found, this initial, analyzing the situation out there. And hopefully that will also help inform if we missed something or overlooked something, or emphasizing the right type of thing. That will help us hopefully get to a resolution on what it is we're trying to study in the second phase. Because of the complexity of the Ivy corridor, it'll be interesting to see if we can sort of keep this on the timeline that is for small scale or for the pipeline project, which is pretty intense. There are other communities around the state who have tried to take a back corridor, that was tough corridor, and they fell behind. And they didn't manage to get all the way through to a project. I'm not saying that's what's going to happen with Ivy, but I would just caution you to be interested to see whether or not we should get into this situation or not. Because of the competing issues in the corridor, the whole discussion, it may stretch out our study period, and we may or may not get to it's the project with the project issue. So we'll see. Hopefully we do, but I don't want to make that promises.
That's money for moving forward yet, or those.
Yeah, you're talking about the White Gables. Is that what you're referring to, the green tea?
So there's the 240, 50.
True. Yes, there are things happening in West Valley, but that's all we have to say.
That's beyond it.
Yeah, but
That's beyond the ag border.
Yeah, the study area we're looking at, the ones from Farmington, with the Wolf's Head, up to all in the city. And it's interesting, I think, be honest with you, I think one of the things I'm trending towards, for the multimodal is not to be looking at that wide of an area. And part because you guys get ready to do the 3-notch study. I think if we can connect something from Bel Air Market to the eastern side of the railroad on the eastern side, trying to figure out a good solution up there, I think that to the west, 3-notch study will tackle a lot of that. Or a lot of thought, like you guys do in the I-4 like lanes, EPA's again, that whole stretch from Highland Garden all the way to that industry, as well as possibilities. I know the EPA is also thinking about like connections and what we hit the connections for highway towards the north. I think in some respects, our road solutions may be thought through in the area, the study area, but our bike solutions may get narrower in focus, and maybe some that while we try and tie this, land use component to the transportation component to decide what is the best way to route a multimodal path through those 2 points. Some elements of it may or may not be part of a application this year. Certainly what we'll find, and I think the major focus will be on had been that congestion and safety issue that are in the intersection itself. It was small, efficient ramps that were built, back in the bypass in the 50s and 60s. They're kind of expensive. To use the technical terms. So it'll be interesting to see how it plays out. But I think that's kind of just an update on our thinking right now. We'll have a more formal presentation again for this Friday for IB on the first week of October. Any questions?
All right, next up, Smart Scale Program updates from Sandy.
Yeah, thank you, Michael. I don't have any new information. The CTV did not meet. Well, I don't know. Did they have a meeting in August? They did not at least discuss Smart Scale in August. Their next meeting is actually tomorrow. So one of the things that they are talking about tomorrow is they're going to talk about sort of evaluating the success of previous Smart Scale projects. So that's one of the things that they're looking for is basically we assign these projects benefit scores. How well are they actually performing based on those benefit scores that we previously reviewed, assuming they're sticking to their schedule. And then they're also going to talk about some updates to the economic development methodology, and there could be some other updates as well that are considered. One of the things that the CTB members that were present at the meeting in July discussed was asking for a breakdown of what the changes and the project selections would be for each of the VDOT construction districts. So that could also be something that is presented at the meeting tomorrow. If you are available and want to be following that, I believe the meeting starts at 8:30 and it's streamed live. I won't be able to follow it live. I'll have to go back and watch the recording. But just wanted to make you all aware that that conversation is still ongoing. Sounds like they are going to be presenting their all-in recommendations in October, and then there's going to be a town hall that is scheduled for November with the expectation that they will be making any changes to adopting new policies around Smart Scale in December. They do have a portal that's set up to receive any comments, so those are things your organization wants to participate in. That's certainly they're certainly working to facilitate that process. But otherwise, I know that this is something that is receiving a lot of attention right now, and mostly just wanted to keep you all updated as to the extent that I am, and also just to leave room for any additional discussion, especially if there were any other thoughts that you had since our previous meeting.
Where are we on like getting a letter to about our like MPO's concerns?
Yeah, our policy board has not seemed inclined to want to develop a letter. So I will mention that we discussed it at the policy board meeting last month, and Captain Daryl Byers, who was our CTB representative, did come to that meeting, so he did hear some of that discussion, but as of right now, we're not planning to submit a letter.
They don't want to?
They have not indicated that they would like us to develop any formal comments on behalf of our region.
Okay.
They haven't explicitly said they're not doing it, but they have asked us to.
But you talked to them about the idea of it and they were like, They just don't care.
I think that, I don't want to speak for them. I think you can watch the meetings or have, yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think there may be some support for some of the changes as well. So, yeah, I don't want to speak for them though.
Is there a possibility of this committee sending a separate report
To the policy board?
to the policy board or to the MPO? Either one,
I would think that something from this would go to the policy board, like requesting that the policy board submit a letter on behalf of the region versus submitting from the tech to.
Okay.
Is that a motion?
That might be something that we need to entertain. Do we want to make a motion for that now, or is that something we should put on the agenda for next time?
Seems reasonable to do it now. We're running out of time. They're deciding in October.
Okay, so we don't have enough time for that, so yeah, let's make a motion.
Policy. Or we don't have enough time to wait. Yeah.
Right. Well, I guess what I'm trying to say is,
Too late anyway.
policy board's meeting, what, next week? The joint thing with the Valley, November, December, they're meeting in October.
They'll meet in October, correct?
That makes sense.
But we kind of need to do it next week. At least decide next week. Right?
We can what?
We kind of need them to get on it, right? If CCP's hearing their final recommendations and.
We won't be able to add this to the agenda to the policy board meeting next week. I think I think it would be okay for October.
You would be able to add a letter or an
It's
intent.
the joint SOL MPO, Stanhill, Bethel, Waynesboro.
Yeah.
and stuff.
Yeah.
So it has a little bit of a different.
Are there specific? Do you want staff to draft a letter?
And do you guys want to share some of your thoughts on what would go into a letter that is up to the policy board?
Honestly, I think that's probably a good topic for discussion for the next meeting, so that we can fully flesh out what we need to ask from them.
Okay.
Probably be good for us to have some more to think about what exactly we want to say.
Okay.
It's a frog. Sorry. Can someone please go get that phone?
Okay.
Thank you.
All right. We'll add that to the agenda in October.
All right, roundtable updates. Let's start with the MPO and JVDC.
The only thing that I'll mention is that this afternoon we invited some additional staff, but kind of during the normal time that we would use our Rural Transportation Advisory Committee meeting, we are meeting with the VDOT retained consultants, Kimley Horn, to do a first review of the crash data analysis that's being supported through VDOT. So this isn't formally part of the Safe Streets and Roads for All grant, but it is work that VDOT is supporting that will be incorporated into the Safe Streets and Roads for All. So I think that's it for updates. Any other updates on that? No. I think that's it.
All right, the city, we are in the home stretch of Arizona ordinance rewrite, at least as far as the planning commission is concerned. We had a 5-hour public hearing on Thursday. We have another work session today, potentially one more work session, I think next week. But we should have a recommendation to council in 2 weeks, and then they will run with it. So we'll see how that goes. Any updates, Ben?
We are learning lots about paint in the city. We have, between our safe routes to school program and our dockless mobility hubs that we're rolling out, we've got 160 projects in safe routes to school and another 25 hubs for dockless mobility that we're rolling out. So lots of paint. I'm pretty sure public service is a little upset with us for how much work we put on their plate, but we'll be seeing all that rolling out this fall. We also have bike parking inventory going on right now, and we are putting out our bike counters again. So you may see some weird boxes showing up on the side of the road. That's us counting people walking and biking. We're also going out and looking at all the bike parking across town so we can figure out where we need to put more. Right now we know downtown is where we need to put more, but besides that, we're not entirely sure. Also depends a little bit on property owners. Large property owners like UVA and where they have their bike parking, so we're working through that with them as well. And then on the transit side, we're continuing to work on the TSP. We're getting through chapter 3 we're starting chapter 3, which is looking at what the route changes would be. Right now, we're looking at changes for the first 5 years to basically incorporate the system optimization plan. That's our current plan for tax expansion. It was adopted a couple years ago, but not implemented because we don't have staff or vehicles as far as. So the first 5 years we focused on that, and the second 5 years would be focused on figuring out how we can incorporate recommendations from the transportation plan that aren't, overlapping with what the system optimization plan is already saying. So we're working through that with our consultant, and also doing some outreach specifically to CAT employees, operators, supervisors, mechanics, things like that. We're currently working through the alternative fuel study as well to figure out what CAT's next fuel is going to be. We're at a point right now where we're talking to other transit agencies that have alternative fuels that we're interested in to sort of get their feedback on what's worked for them, what problems they've been facing. We're also looking at maybe visiting one of those agencies that has multiple fuel types and see if they have issues with mixing fuel types and having some buses on one and some buses on another. So working through the logistics of that. We're also working with DRPT to roll out, I think we're at 12 shelters right now. So we have 12 sites around the city that we're looking to put bus shelters down on, and DRPT is helping us do that. So a lot of stuff going on, but specifically this weekend, we also have the Loop to Build event, and my bike ped coordinator, Tommy, would murder me if I didn't mention that. He's the organizer of that. It's not a city event, it's a Ravenna Trails event, but going to be a lot of people out on the trails this weekend. We'll be meeting a lot of hikers, runners, bikers, so we all can join us.
I will be there with you.
Thanks. How many safe routes projects did you say? 100 something?
160.
Wow.
Most of those are paint and plastic post projects. There are some projects that are applications where we did that last year that are going to actually be concrete projects, but those will probably happen later in the spring or right after school lets out in June. So just so we're not breaking up anybody's walk to school.
Yep. Are those 12 shelters all in the city or just around CAT?
Those are all in the city. The county can come up with their own list of shelter priorities that DRPT can help CAT and county with.
Cool. Yes. County?
Yeah, we are in the process of trying to get a bunch of money right now. We are submitting a Reconnecting Communities and Neighborhoods grant. It's a resubmission of the one we submitted last year with a little bit more focus on some city neighborhoods as well. And that application is being submitted with support from the city of Charlottesville. We're also working on our revenue sharing applications. We're submitting 3 applications this year to get additional funding to complete 3 projects that have been started but have gotten progressively more and more expensive, and we've needed more money. So that's what we're working on right now, and I'll hand it off to Albert to talk about project prioritization and county presence at the Loop to Build.
So yeah, Loop to Build, I will be there Sunday as part of the little discussion series thing happening, so that'll be fun. And then for the prioritization, we are like actually in a home stretch now. I've been saying this for a long time, I've worked on it, but like everything's ranked, and now tomorrow I'm gonna sit there and spend 8 hours just going through GIS and making the maps and getting it done. So I think we're going to the board in October, first week of October? October 4th for that, to get the board's feedback for work session and kind of be like, okay, let's see, we'll move from there. We just formally requested, or the board adopted a resolution to formally request VDOT look at a through truck restriction on Plank Road from North Garden going northwest through Batesville to 250. And then, yeah, that's the main things right now. It's chugging along.
Luis, anything to add, or?
From the board standpoint, a lot of it is working with the comp plan. So we have another work session next week.
Sounds right.
Yeah. I should know that. Yeah, before we do some of the toolkits and stuff. Cool. I think that helps cover.
Out of curiosity, the Route 20 plan, are you guys still moving forward with that one?
We just received the final deliverable from our consultants. What we ended up asking them to do was to create like some sort of memo describing the alternatives and what the recommendation was from these experts. So we are going to submit that final memo to the board at a future date. Probably not for discussion. It's probably just gonna go on the for information only consent agenda. We are not planning on picking up that, seeking any funding right now for that particular project, but we have all this great work done and it's gonna hang out until that project is a higher priority.
All right, DRP2.
I don't see anyone on the call from DRPT.
Okay. VDOT, anything to add?
I will add that the smart scale course is going to start in earnest next year for the application at the state level. But, I've talked to you all before about 4 steps of capital improvement. And the planning at the beginning and the maintaining at the end. The 3rd step of engineering and construction is always important. It's something we always try to work through. Picking the right projects for the application, coming up with good concept plans and coming up with good estimates. That's project selection component. What we're really going to start pushing on over the next several months, starting out, we will be reaching out to the localities to talk about, which projects do they want to start working on this, and how can we help if they choose to help develop some of these projects. Basically, I see the smart scale projects kind of coming in 3 major streams. The first stream is the stars and pipeline studies that I was talking about earlier, which will potentially generate some projects. The second one is PSI, or potential safety improvement areas, intersections or segments of roads, to safety schools well with smart scale. And the third category is kind of another. It's kind of like what projects you all want to pursue that may not fall into these first 2 categories. So we will be reaching out late October to through the residency engineers to our localities to talk about these types of projects. So if there is something that you all are thinking about for a smart scale project, especially if it falls in that kind of others category, or biped projects or something like that, we'd be very interested in finding out what you all are thinking about. Because again, we would like to try either set up some sort of standards that we're looking for people to meet as far as the detailed nature of the plans and the estimates that will fund these funding applications, and or how VDOT can help develop those concept plans and estimates and partnerships with localities. So that's the process we're working towards, and we'll be hearing more from us in the next couple weeks.
All right, next up is ride share. Oh, yeah,
Hey everyone, just a really quick update. We are in the throes of celebrating lots of transit this month. It is the birthday of the Afton Express, their 2-year anniversary. And so they have some events planned. I know they we're stationed outside at some stops at UVA handing out birthday cookies. And we'll be doing another fare-free day and then an event, I believe, at one of the stops on their side of the mountain. I believe the Stanton Mall next week. This is also Discover Transit Month for DRPT, so we have been doing various transit promotions with that, and then gearing up to start promoting carpools and vanpools again. And that's all for rideshare.
David Cook also has some comments for VDOT. He's online.
Okay, David, go ahead.
Thank you, Sarah. Oh, we can't hear you, David.
David, you're on mute.
He wasn't a second ago. Maybe we can come back to him. Yeah, we'll come back to him.
All right, do we have a CAD update?
Not yet, but I already did.
The John updates.
Yeah, so we are working on redesigning some of our connect routes based on the TDP recommendations, and we just had our first kickoff meeting for the rural needs assessment study that we're conducting with North Dakota State University. So yeah, I think our next meeting will be in December. Part of it's like the technical study, so they're kind of just gathering information, but we had a pretty good turnout for the meeting, even though it's virtual, but yeah. That's what we're doing.
Cool. Yeah.
Sure. Things on personnel front, Scott's skills is now have been in place since August as our head of department of transportation. He has a really strong background in planning and travel reviews. Right now, he's just like, but hopefully we'll start to see him more in transportation planning venues and meetings. On the project side, yes, ID corridor continues to, that's our construction project, and we have three active projects there through under construction. Continues to impact, Emma Street and Ivy Road periodically, though less so lately. And the Ivy Road corridor in particular, and transportation seems to be really starting to coalesce and changes there, especially as you get over the street. The new traffic pattern on the lanes, other side of that. The other one mentioned, which is not under construction yet, but in planning, design, and the visitor review and all that good stuff, is the Fontaine Research Park. We have park. There's a big biotechnology building is really impetus for additional projects to support that in the park, including an energy plan, specifically transportation, working on an internal transportation network, as well as a large parking garage for 1,200 cars that will support new building, because we're building out on existing parking, so we're replacing the parking garage, but also catch the demand for that building and future buildings that we're building now, so we have further development there in the future. And really the impact for our community with that is as certain small scale projects begin construction as well, potentially in the city and county, that area is pretty impacted for
Anyone else have any updates on this?
I think, David, do you want to try again?
Yeah, can you hear me now? All right, good deal. We have these new docking stations, and I wonder if it's just not picking me up. So, thank you, everybody. I'm David Cook, the statewide bicycle and pedestrian planner here at VDOT Central Office. We have a couple of new items and initiatives that are underway. First off, we do have a state trails plan that is underway, and the survey for that just launched yesterday. So we'll be sending out the survey link to all of our MPO partners, localities, PDCs. I'm going to go ahead and drop the survey in the comments for you guys, but basically that'll help us identify gaps, barriers, opportunities in the statewide trail network, and kind of get preferences on how we should develop trails for what type of user and where they should be. So be sure to kind of spread the word on that. Secondly, we do have a fresh new contract for roadway reconfigurations that just started about a week ago with Michael Baker International, our on-call consultant, providing technical services, basically all data collection, existing conditions analysis, and no-build operational analysis, virtual and in-person meetings, and kind of the final alternative conceptual design and cost estimates. So if you have any ideas or priorities for roadway reconfigurations or road diets, go ahead and please let our office know. We can assist you in any kind of technical preparation work and documentation on roadway reconfigurations. Otherwise, we are currently working on our vulnerable roadway user assessment. That is a federally mandated safety analysis of pedestrian and bicycle hotspots or crash locations. What types of facilities are the crashes occurring on? Basically looking at roadway design and area types and different levels of areas. So we'll go ahead and keep you guys updated. VDOT does have a page out on that on our website. We are actually going to be launching our PSAP, except this summer around it's going to be the PBSAP, the Pedestrian Bicycle Safety Action Plan. This will be our 4th iteration of that mapping tool and document. So that should be launching in concurrence with the Vulnerable Roadway User Assessment in November when we have that document finalized. So we do have a new kind of weighting methodology for this update with a little bit more weighting on the roadway characteristic, followed by place-based characteristics. So their weighting has changed a little bit. Some of the locations and corridors have changed, but be looking for that in November. That will kind of directly feed to V-Trans and how we identify bicycle safety improvements in V-Trans. But that is really it for updates from central office. Thank you.
All right, thanks. All right, so with that, we'll go to our closing matters from the public. We have a couple members of the public here and on the Zoom. Does anyone wish to give a comment? It's like a no from here. We've got a couple on the Zoom. Feel free to unmute if you'd like to give a comment. All right, looks like a no. Anyone else have any other matters they wish to discuss? If not, we are adjourned.